If there's one thing the Walt Disney Company has gotten very adept at over the last several years, it is overspending on content for very little return. And in this case, it's no different over at Lucasfilm and Star Wars with their upcoming series in 2024, The Acolyte. And as we predicted, there would be a tax return that would come later this year once we started seeing some filings. And just a few days ago, they actually dropped that filing in the United Kingdom. We've got it. We're going to talk about it along with some comparisons from Forbes magazine, who have done some great digging over the years to give us a rough idea of just how these things pan out. And that $49 million, that is before a single actor took the stage and a single camera rolled. Here we go. Renegade Online. Well, folks, welcome back. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's good to see everybody out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video, not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment and turn that little red subscribe button to gray. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, please do leave a comment before you head out the door today. So here we have an article from just about 3 days ago from Caroline Reed, once again over at Forbes magazine, who does yeoman's work, digging up United Kingdom, that'd be British tax returns for these production entities that Hollywood studios will set up overseas in order to house all of the financial and operational management of, say, a major motion picture, or in this case, a Disney Plus Star Wars Lucasfilm television show, namely The Acolyte. Now, don't let the numbers fool you in the title. That $49 million is a big figure, but that's only on pre-production. This is a number that doesn't even include once the cameras started rolling for nearly 6 months at Shinfield Studios in the UK. Disney has revealed that it spent $49.2 million US dollars, or 38.3 million British pounds sterling, on pre-production of The Acolyte, its upcoming Star Wars streaming series, which is set before the events of the main movies. It's a staggering $5.5 million, or 4.3 million British pounds sterling more than Disney spent on pre-production of 2016's big screen Star Wars blockbuster Rogue One. Now, real quick, that movie came out 7 years ago almost at this point, so we've got some inflationary pressures to factor in, quite a bit of inflationary pressure since 2016. Namely, just in the last 2 or 3 years alone, we have seen inflation skyrocket. Of course, this impacts dramatically the cost of all of these features that go into pre-production. Pre-production typically includes getting the script prepared, for example. How about renting a major soundstage like Shinfield? That is a multi-billion-dollar facility that usually comes with a hefty price tag to use one of those stages for, say, 6 months like The Acolyte. You've also got major costs when it comes to set design, set construction, both inside the studio and on a backlot at Shinfield that we saw pictures of from the Bespin Bulletin months ago for The Acolyte that they built. And that also would include things like costume design and manufacture. That would also include prop design and the manufacture of those props. It's a lot of cost and planning that goes into this. And you can see, when you talk about a show like The Acolyte or Skeleton Crew or even Mandalorian, you're talking about very long shoot times, where the average movie might be 2 hours long. When you're talking about an 8-episode series like this, you're usually talking somewhere in the range of around 4 hours at least of finished content that goes onto the screen. That's a lot more principal photography, and in the case of this tax return, it hasn't even been included yet. Last year's hit Star Wars streaming series Andor spent 38% more on pre-production, but it was made at the height of the pandemic, so it had to invest heavily in certain protocols and needed its production budget to be adjusted accordingly. Even pre-production costs of the main installments of the Star Wars saga weren't that far off from The Acolyte. Disney only spent 17% more on pre-production of The Last Jedi in 2017. In contrast, little is known about The Acolyte, which is set to land on Disney Plus next year in 2024. And that was, of course, confirmed by Bob Iger recently at a Morgan Stanley telecom conference just a few months ago. In February, Disney's CEO Bob Iger told investors that the studio needs to, quote, reduce costs on everything that we make, because while we're extremely proud of what's on the screen, it's gotten to a point where it's extraordinarily expensive. A total of 7,000 job cuts and $5.5 billion of cost savings followed. But even that wasn't enough. Just a few days ago, Bob Iger told CNBC that Disney was slowing down when it comes to making movies and TV series for Marvel and Star Wars franchises. Quote, "You pull back not just to focus, but also as a part of our cost containment initiative, spending less on what we make and making less." Budgets of television shows are usually a closely guarded secret, as studios tend to absorb the cost of individual programs and their overall expenses. However, big exceptions are the ones where they are filmed in the United Kingdom, like The Acolyte. Principal photography began in October of 2022 at Shinfield, just outside of London, where The Acolyte was reportedly filmed in front of the same stagecraft LED screens that have been used to such great effect in The Mandalorian. The location shines a spotlight on the spending. Shows made in the United Kingdom benefit from the Television Tax Relief Act, or they call it a scheme in Great Britain. But of course, we tend to think of the word scheme here in the U.S. as being something negative, but in Britain, that is just the standard terminology. This allows studios to claim a cash reimbursement of up to 25% of the money they spend in the United Kingdom. What's important to note is that this initial tax return for The Acolyte was set back from its initial required reporting period. Disney had asked for an extension because they wanted to hit a break right around pre-production. As you'll see in a moment, the tax return actually ends on the 24th of September, 2022, and principal photography started a few weeks later. Now, to get to the actual tax return itself, you can see here, fair review of the business during the period the company, that would be Blue Stockings Limited in the UK, was involved in high-end television production. The company made a loss before tax of 5.9 million British pounds sterling during the period, and at the period end, had net assets of about 8,800 pounds. Now, what's noteworthy about that is the financial planning that goes in, or the accounting planning that goes into this. The reason that they showed a loss of 5.9 million pounds is because they had already calculated that they would be receiving around the same 5.9 million pounds in a UK film tax credit, which they did. You can see turnover of 32.4 million pounds, cost of sales 37.9 million pounds, showing that gross loss or profit, and in this case a loss of 5.5 million pounds. Administrative expenses, loss before taxation at 5.9, and look, tax on loss, a positive integer, meaning that it wasn't an outflow of cash. They didn't pay taxes on this. They got that tax credit back in of roughly 5.9 million pounds. One of the questions I keep seeing most often is, where do these productions get the money to actually finance these operations? Well, pretty much every major studio out there operates on lines of credit from major third-party commercial lenders, people like Bank of America or JP Morgan Chase. Or in the case of UK production companies, they're getting loans from British banks like HSBC or Lloyds or Barclays, for example. In fact, there was an article not that long ago where Lionsgate Studios here in the US just renewed their line of credit with JP Morgan, going from $500 million to a full $1 billion. No doubt, due to the success of a lot of their productions and releases lately, they're trying to expand. Now, if a studio like Lionsgate can pull off a $1 billion line of credit with JP Morgan Chase, what kind of line of credit do you think the Walt Disney Company has both here in the US and abroad? Well, it's billions, plural. Disney does a lot of film production and television production overseas, particularly in the UK, so it would not all surprise me if they have a $2 or $3 billion line of credit with a place like Lloyd's. So the ultimate source of funding for a project like The Acolyte comes from Lloyd's Bank, for example, in London, via the Walt Disney Company's line of credit and their borrowing power. At the end of the day, these are the kind of things that Disney is going to have to get under control. Now, again, The Acolyte was greenlit as far back as we could tell, March of 2021. That's when Blue Stockings LLC was formed by the Walt Disney Company itself through their Sacramento law firm that is in control of registering all of these corporate entities for their film and TV production. That would have been way before even Bob Chapek was around, talking about layoffs and cost reduction at the Walt Disney Company, well before Bob Iger came back and started doing it himself. In other words, shows like this already had the go-ahead long before these cuts came in. The cuts we're seeing now from Disney are going to affect shows moving forward from that point. The Acolyte apparently was just much too far along the process for that to have any serious impact. Not to mention, there's not a whole lot of other Star Wars content, and Star Wars content, for good or ill, is considered core by the Walt Disney Company. But we have seen similar wacky and wild budgets on things like Andor, even Secret Invasion that just dropped on Disney Plus that nobody seems to be really watching. Disney has to be looking at stuff like this and asking itself, can we really continue to spend this much money on core content when it's not really performing up to par? At least it's not even getting them on the board nearly as much as, say, a Netflix production might. And a lot of times, Netflix is spending a lot less money for much better results. Now, if we take the $50 million spend that Disney has already allocated to pre-production as of September of 2022 on that tax return and scale that out to what they would have spent on the entire rest of the show, which is currently in post-production, we're probably somewhere in the neighborhood of around $250 million or $250 million, especially when you compare it to similar pre-production budgets from similar productions in the past. As we mentioned, some of that, of course, would be offset by the UK film tax credit, but that's still an amazing amount of money to spend on a streaming product that may or may not be a success next year, especially given the recent woes of other Disney Plus endeavors. In addition to that, if Disney were to pull the plug on such a show at this point, they would lose all of those film tax credits under British law. So to cancel a show like this before it even gets released would be a very expensive decision for the Walt Disney Company to make. Spending hundreds of millions of dollars to produce films that at best perform, generally speaking, mediocre, or in many cases, just horrible. Look at Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Do you think Disney's real happy about having to pay that $300+ million production budget bill and another $100+ million in marketing for a movie that is probably not even going to get to $400 million in the theaters? And remember, Disney only gets about half of that money back from theaters. So they will have spent $400 million and maybe only get back half of that. And that doesn't even begin to discuss the amount of losses that continue to rack up on Disney Plus, which is now somewhere around $13 billion in the hole cumulatively since its launch. The Walt Disney Company will have an earnings call on Wednesday, August 9th. You better be paying attention to that one. We sure will be. We'll be covering it live here on the channel. Make sure you stick around for that as well. Set those notifications once we have the link up here in the next few days. It's going to be very interesting to see how Bob Iger answers what I'm sure is going to be a very lively question and answer session during that call. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe, hit that notification bell, share your thoughts in the comments below, and until next time, take care.